If you've been anywhere near the video game news sphere this month, chances are you've heard of Elden Ring, and just how brutal and great it is. Well, it's true for various reasons, but one thing it isn't is unfair or unapproachable. The From Software games have always had the knack for being these challenging games that everyone claims are difficult, but I also think that makes the general public feel like these games are unfair, and that's simply not the case. What makes Elden Ring stand out so much more now than any of the other games that From Software has developed isn't that it's an open world, but that it's an open world game that amplifies the best elements of traditional Dark Souls games, and is all the better for it. Like most other Dark Souls games, Elden Ring's story is mysterious and dense, and requires paying close attention to the dialogues and quests scattered along the way. You most likely won't be able to digest its story in one go, but part of the fun is going back to the side quests, learning more about the lore, or talking to friends online who might have faced a completely different enemy who found out something you didn't. If I could somehow wrap around the feeling of going online and looking up an explained video for the newest Marvel movie I just got out of watching, that's what Elden Ring's story feels like to me. You're known as the Tarnished and have nothing really special about you other than being blessed by grace, and now you feel the need to go on this long, perilous journey of seeking out the Elden Ring. George R.R. Martin's script, along with the directing of Hidetaka Miyazaki, is polished and well written, though it does fall behind the organic stories living within this world. That's to say, I think the overarching plot of Elden Ring is great, but it's the minor stories in the same world that are truly fascinating. Getting to see quests develop over time makes them feel organic and almost serendipitous. Talking to one NPC at the start of the game at one point in the world, only to see them hours later somewhere else in the world continuing that same plotline, was always a treat to discover. Likewise, the world and its story is so expansive and dense, that there were a handful of stories that I started but never finished. Ultimately, that leads to playing through the New Game Plus and continuing to explore the secrets I missed along my first 70-ish hour playthrough. That's also the joy in Elden Ring's story, feeling like you're never done learning a bit more. There aren't any quest markers or main objective icons, so exploring the world and thus discovering the narrative feels so natural, not just because the game doesn't tell you where to go, but is designed to symmetrically entice you to explore it. In the same vein, you'll still see someone discovering a brand new trick or mechanic in Breath of the Wild 5 years after it's been released. I can see the same thing happening with Elden Ring, and that prospect is truly exciting. Elden Ring feels like From Software's piece de resistance. Their games have always had a knack for challenging bosses that absolutely crush those not willing to study and learn boss patterns and mechanics. These Soul games have always rewarded those willing to put in the discipline and the effort into playing, and Elden Ring is no different. What it does do differently is creating an open world that further amplifies those mechanics, crafting together a world that feels organic to explore as a true evolution of the Souls formula. It's a completely new sense of freedom, and freedom is the overall encompassing theme with Elden Ring. I've played countless open world games from the masterful Breath of the Wild to the icon-filled and level-gaining Ubisoft games that come out just about every year. Elden Ring finds its balance of making a gigantic world with very little direction, yet making it feel genius. You won't find any objective markers, and heck, even the map is vaguely hidden until you find the actual map item of the area to reveal the terrains around you. Even then, NPCs and the quests aren't written down anywhere. All you really get to see are the occasional structures and your sites of grace where you can fast travel to. Other than that, you're on your own, whether it's exploring on foot or by horseback. The world is elegantly designed to entice exploration, and you'll most definitely find instances where you'll come across a boss that just is way too powerful for you to take on. It doesn't give you a level marker to distinguish that, and your best guess is the amount of damage you can deal with it, and whether you think you can survive long enough to keep landing enough hits. That's about it. It's not punishing because it's unfair though, but rather for those just unwilling to study the threat they're facing. Yes, this means dying a lot, but that's also part of the process, and Elden Ring is nice enough to plant sites of grace in your bosses so you can come back ready to fight quickly. Battle mechanics have changed a bit from other Souls games and feel like a hybrid of Sekiro and Souls at times. While the movements and attacks are more Souls-like, you can now jump. It's not as nimble as Sekiro, but it does open up for the ability to jump attack, a new useful part of your arsenal. You also have Spirit Ashes. These are summons with limited restrictions. You can collect a handful of different ones from across the open world and call them to your aid in battle. They're incredibly useful, but also can be easily killed by more powerful bosses. I'd recommend using them more for crowd control over taking down a boss. As you come across battles, you'll no doubt eventually hit a stalemate you can't get past. What I enjoyed about Elden Ring though, is how you can simply walk away from a fight and try a different path, and come back to this one later. It's a game that never feels like you're just stuck in place because there's so much to keep doing and exploring. That's also why I never really felt completely lost or bored of the world. There was always a hidden path to find, an underground tomb to explore, a side quest where I found a new weapon, or an NPC that I just hadn't seen in a while suddenly show up. The idea of going on these expeditions, getting stronger, collecting more runes to level up, and just finding cool new weapons or armor sets always enticed me to keep exploring. It's also equally rewarding in that I don't think there was ever a time I wasn't rewarded for my curiosity. In fact, despite having this vast open world, there are even smaller linear dungeons hiding inside that will scratch the itch of those looking for a more formulaic experience from other games. Overall, Elden Ring's gameplay feels iconic not because it's Dark Souls gone open world, but because the open world is designed around the mechanics that already make Dark Souls games so fantastic. It gives you just enough to bite onto and reels you in with clever design and iconic boss fights that just push you to keep on taking challenges until you come out victorious. Elden Ring is packed with beautiful vistas, terrifying bosses, and just jaw-dropping presentation that feels like From Software is firing on all cylinders. Walking around this world feels like a long-lost fantasy story come to life, complete with skyboxes that look ripped out of a storybook. That's yet to touch on the later sections of the game that appear even more warped in artistic design, but I'll let you discover those for yourself. Seeing so much of this grand world filled with large bosses that just seamlessly connect to one another makes the world feel so organic. No loading screens or transitions between walking into a dungeon or a cave or anything of that nature. Outside of a death or some cutscenes, the world magically connects to one another. Legacy dungeons feel reminiscent of older Soul games, but more lavish and grander, yet still follow the more linear design you're probably used to. As far as performance goes, Elden Ring is available on various consoles from last gen, current gen, and PC. Last gen consoles target 30 frames per second, hovering around 20 to 30 FPS at a dynamic 1080p for PS4 and Xbox One. PS4 Pro and Xbox One X tends to hover around 30 to 35 frames per second with the same resolution. As for current gen consoles, Xbox Series S runs at 35 frames per second in quality mode, favoring resolution, while hitting up to 50 frames per second in performance mode targeting 1080p over 1440. Xbox Series X runs at 35 to 40 FPS in quality mode, while hitting the 50 to 60 target in performance mode. Lastly, PS5 runs at about 40 frames per second in quality mode and 60 FPS in performance mode. With PC, there was a stuttering issue pre-launch, and though a patch has been released since then to target those issues, it's still there with the occasional stutter during asset loading moments between levels. It's clear that the game isn't well optimized for PC hardware as it should be, though From Software is adamant about fixing the issue. The current stutter when loading wouldn't be as bad if it didn't occasionally collide with the placement of some enemies. An overclock of some higher end rigs can help remedy the issue, but the performance on my RTX 3060 3700X rig shouldn't be this bad at times. Elden Ring's soundtrack is filled with so many grand epics that feel perfect for exploring this enormous fantasy playground. The main theme's drums quickly get my adrenaline going with a newfound sense of adventure. It gets me ready to explore and take on what this hell of a battlefield throws at me. I was also happily surprised by the performance of all the NPCs and boss battles. Elden Ring is a cinematic experience unlike any other game from the developer's prior work, and seeing the evolution of their presentation was astonishing. The cutscene introductions to a boss fight and getting that initial first impression of the actor's performance always felt enamoring. Walking around minding my own business thinking I'm safe only to hear a drum start to play always sent a shiver down my spine as I knew something was coming that wasn't going to be an easy encounter. Elden Ring is an amazing game because it takes what's already been so great with prior Soul games and elevates it with complementing world design, new mechanics, and a fantastic presentation that only further exudes the elements already making this series so great. The open world isn't an extraordinarily new concept, there have been other games that don't hold your hand too. However, From Software co-designed these features hand in hand with Elden Ring, and it truly feels like a match made in Limgrave. Very much how Breath of the Wild felt like it set a new standard for its series, I can't imagine Soul games going back to anywhere else besides open worlds like this. Had this launched with better optimization and performance across consoles and PC, I'd no doubt be giving this a 10, but don't let that stop you from jumping into what feels like the best, if not the most approachable game in the series thus far.